Well, welcome to our next module. This month we're introducing to you what we call the core group and the core group meeting. Now, every year we hear from churches around the country that they wish they could just hit the reset button. They want to hit reboot. And really what they're saying to us is, how do we get everybody in our church on the same page, singing from the same sheet of music, and with a goal in mind for the year? And we found that one of the best, most effective ways to get everybody onto the same page with the same set of goals is by first establishing the core group, but then having the core group meeting. John, tell us just a little bit about the core group.
Well, so here's the thing. We're talking about two components. First of all, you have a core group of people that are part of your church, and that's kind of phase one. Phase two is the annual meeting. And so we're going to break that into two pieces as we do this. So here's the reason why we do this. The number one reason is people help support what they help create. And oftentimes, as pastors, we sort of go into our study and we come out with the stone tablets, and we're trying to push an agenda on them. We're trying to get them on board with our agenda. Instead, what we want to do is we want to try to create a culture where they're helping to build the agenda. So people help support what they help create. Number two is, we've talked about this throughout church goals. Your job is not to lead the congregation. Your job is to lead a team that leads the congregation. And then the third thing that's so important in this, who is the minister in your church? And if you ask churches around the country, they'll say, well, I'm the minister. But Judd, who really is the minister in the church?
Oh, it's the entire congregation.
Every person is a minister. And a lot of churches get this wrong. They think we have one minister in the congregation. No, we have one congregation and it's made up of ministers. The core group is the monthly gathering of ministers. And so we'd encourage you to develop a core group that meets once a month.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about that, if we're called to go out and make disciples, you can't possibly have one pastor that's going to make all of the disciples in his church or her church. Literally, it has to be that one person is going to disciple another person, and that person's going to disciple another person. So it really does beg that model that we just talked about of everybody in the church has to become the pastor to everybody else.
Yeah,
Great concept.
So we want to have this core group meeting. Again, in the early days of Bayside, we did it every single month. People were on board. We gave them information. We made them insiders to the church.
Yeah, and once you set that up of having these meetings and you've established your core, and there's actually a module on the core to your church, but once you develop your core, and we're going to talk to you just a little bit about that today, then you want to hold this one meeting that you have where you actually do hit reset. You actually do get everybody in your church to be on the same page. And we found that there's really 4 times in the year that you could have that meeting. The first one is late August or early September. For whatever reason, that's when I think the world kind of feels like things get started again. So people are going back to school. It kind of feels like the beginning of a year. Great time to have a core meeting, either late August before kind of the fall launch, or right at the beginning of that fall launch. The next one is mid-January to February. It's kind of a lull. When you think about the year, not a lot going on after Christmas. There's this little bit of a lull in the dead of winter after Christmas and kind of before March rolls around or before Easter. So mid-January, February is a good one. Late March is good, but not too close to Easter. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we don't bump up on Easter. And then the final one is late May or early June. We found that these are the 4 times during the year. And there's a simple solution to this. Look at your calendar for the entire year. Look at the things that are going on. Holidays, sports events, graduations, weddings, the things that are going on, and try and plan the core meeting either at the beginning of a season or when there's a little bit of a lull in the calendar.
That's so important. Now, the question a lot of people ask is, who do you invite to this? And we have a list of 7 different people you want to invite. First of all, you want to invite your generous partners. These are people that have the gift of giving. You want those folks in there because they're going to help support. And again, people help support what they help create.
Yeah, and also people that are generous givers, sometimes they feel like because they're so generous, they want to have a little bit of a say in their church. And when you invite them in, again, they will help support what they get to help create.
Right. And then the second one is key volunteers. These are people that have the gift of serving. Get those folks in there. Gifted leaders, people with the gift of leadership. You want leaders in this group. Spiritual giants. This is people that have the gift of praying, and they're your prayer warriors. You want your evangelists in here, people that love to share the gospel. They have the gift of evangelism. And then finally, you want to have group leaders. These are your shepherds. They're leading small groups. So you begin to go and you meet with your staff or meet with some of your key leaders, and you begin to brainstorm based on those lists. And another thing that we'll often do is we'll actually make a little announcement. And it depends. You will know your church whether you need to do this or not, but there might be some people in your church that will get left off of a list, and they'll get upset that they were left off of the list. So we'll get up on a Sunday and just say, hey, we got a meeting coming up where we're going to be, gathering to discuss some things about the future of our church. If you'd like an invite, just send an email or call the office. Just a real simple thing. And then if somebody comes back later and said, I heard you had a meeting and I wasn't there, we'll say, well, we announced it. It was announced. And again, you may get some great people that are in the congregation that weren't on your list because of that announcement.
You'll also find that you're going to have people that are sitting in church on Sunday, and when they hear that they're looking around going, whoa, Bob's not here. Bob should definitely be at that meeting. You'll be able to trigger inside people in your congregation that are sitting there going, oh yeah, I know somebody that should come, and you can have them tell them about it. The other thing is, you don't want to just invite kind of one age group of people or one class of people. You want to be really inclusive. And one of the things that we've learned here is that the more inclusive that you can be instead of exclusive,
yes,
the better this is going to go.
Most churches are exclusive. It's like they want to have a very small leadership core, and they want to keep everyone out. At Bayside, we found the secret is getting as many people in and to be insiders as possible.
So we'll actually invite high school students,
yes,
college students. At the other end of the spectrum, we'll invite people that have been retired for some period of time, and everybody in between. Yeah. We literally try and get every age group. We look for movers and shakers. Who are the leaders, not necessarily just in ministries, but who are the people that are, when they walk around, they seem to have a group of people following them. They just naturally attract people. We look for all different, and it's funny, we'll have these meetings and somebody will be like, how did I get invited to this?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we see you're at the church a lot. We think you're kind of a mover and shaker. We just wanted your input.
Well, you know what? This is kind of your story. I mean, Judd, came to Bayside, was attending, got invited into some leadership meetings, got invited into serving, and now has been, at the highest levels of leadership at Bayside. It all started because you were included.
That's right. Yeah, and that never would have happened if Bayside hadn't done the things that we're talking about doing.
Now, how do we prepare for the event? What do they need?
Yeah, so the actual event itself, so the event's going to be literally a meeting that we're going to have. We found that the best time for the meeting is typically after your last service on Sunday, maybe Sunday afternoon, evening, Monday night, Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening. Those are all decent times, but we found the best time to hold the meeting is literally on a Sunday afternoon or a Monday or Tuesday evening. Now, you want to hold this in a meeting room, and there's some materials that you're going to want to get before the meeting takes place. So the first thing is you're going to want a large whiteboard. So something that you can literally put handwrite things on, put Post-it notes on. If you don't have one, those really large sheets that are the sticky notes, the large Post-it notes, they're literally like 2 feet by 3 feet that you can stick on the wall. Those would be important to have. The small Post-it notes, the 3-inch by 3-inch Post-it pads, get enough of those to give everybody that's there about 20 or 30 of those little Post-it notes. This one's really key. Round little stickers. So we want at least 1/2 inch in diameter, but 3/4 of an inch or an inch are good. But literally, these little stickers that you might see that you put on things like for a price or something, you can get them down at the stationery store by the hundreds. Get those. They're going to be used for voting. Then something to write on, of course. But finally, we found that one of the key components that you have to have is food.
Food, yeah.
So
good food.
Good food, yeah. So, and I'd say 2 different kinds. If you do this after the last service on Sunday, you might want to serve lunch, either before or in the middle. Or if it's on Sunday evening or one of the other evenings, have dinner. And these don't have to be elaborate. It can be spaghetti or, I mean, so many times we've brought in pizza, and that was it. But have have a meal together. There's something, I think so much of the heavy lifting in the Bible
Yeah.
is done around food. But then also have snacks on the table.
Yes.
So, and John and I we're always the ones that are like, we're going to pick out the snacks. 'Cause we'll have M&Ms
Yes.
and we'll have Skittles and we'll have some good stuff. But have the snacks there. And then the room setup is really important as well. So our best recommendation is use round tables and just set the room up with round tables, 6 or 8 chairs around each table. But there's one key that we do at Bayside that has been part of our secret sauce that we've done at every event, and that is if you think you're going to get 50 people there, put up 40 chairs. If you think you're going to get 30, put up 15, or some put up less than you think you're going to actually get. And you're going to get fought on this. You're going to get your facilities people going, no, if you think you're going to get 30, we're going to put 35 up. But John, tell us about the momentum behind this, because it's been part of our secret sauce forever.
Well, this works in meetings, it works in
Sunday morning.
services. Yeah, so what you want to try to do, you want to have this event in a room that's small enough where everyone feels like they're right on top of each other. Now, I know that,
It seems counter.
that seems crazy, but people, there's an energy that happens in a small room versus a large room. And I'd rather meet in a closet with a few people and be tight like this than to be in a large room with lots of people. So I remember one weekend at Bayside where we changed our chair setup and set up too many chairs. And I remember I was in the hallway and I heard someone walk in and they said, "Oh, wow. Bayside's shrinking. I wonder what's happening. Why are people not coming to church here anymore?" I heard that conversation. Well, the truth was that weekend we had more people than the week before. It's just we did the wrong chair setup.
Yeah.
So almost every single week, I get up and say, take down some chairs, take down some chairs. Now, if you have pews, we've developed curtains where we hide pews, we've covered them. We do a lot of different things so that people will walk into a room that feels full and tight.
Yeah. Folks, this is such a key. It's a momentum builder. It is great to walk into a room, and here's the momentum behind it, where people go, you're setting up chairs, and it looks like you're scrambling at the last minute to make room for more people, and you're going, man, this is really great. So many people are coming, way more than we expected. Yeah. And now it's like, wow, there's a lot going on here, versus what John said, people are coming in, and the worst scenario is that you set up all these tables and you only have 2 or 3 people at a table that's set for 6 or 8. Yeah. And now there's not as much interaction, and people begin to feel like, wow, is our church shrinking? Yeah. So that one note there, that applies to not only the core meeting, it applies to Sunday morning services, it applies to any event or any meeting that
Sunday
you're doing.
Sunday school classes, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So set the room up in round tables, the whiteboard at the front, a mic if you have a room that's going to need the mic for a lot of people showing up. And then that leads us to how do you actually run the meeting?
Yeah.
And in everything that we do, we create what we call a run sheet.
Yes. Now, this run sheet we're going to talk about is the run sheet for the yearly reboot. Now, we do these again monthly, and the agendas are pretty similar. I'll talk about, and you can take a combination of these things. You can use some of them. So one of the things, again, you begin with the meal, and then worship is optional. And it's sometimes we do worship, sometimes we don't. It's hard to do worship in a small room with a small group of people, so we don't always do it. But if your congregation, you feel like that's a good thing to do, you can begin with worship. We always celebrate God's goodness, and we'll ask a question like, "Hey, what is going right around church here? Like, what are the things that you're excited about?" Or another way to phrase it, we'll say, "Hey, you run into somebody in the grocery store and they say, 'Hey, Bob, you are going to church. You seem to spend a lot of time there. What do you like about that church? Why do you spend so much time there?' How would you answer that question?" And then you share, and it's amazing because you begin to hear things and realize God's at work in your church. So we always celebrate. You want to share vision. As a leader, you share vision. And what we're going to talk about is how to get shared vision, but there is a part where you share kind of what God's put on your heart. but a part of the meeting is hearing what God's put on their heart. And then you want to dream together. And we'll say, hey, Bayside was really built on asking and answering 3 questions every year. We've added a 4th, but there really are 4 questions. And during the reboot, these are the 4 questions that we ask.
And they're the 4 questions that you're going to want to ask as well.
That's right. So the first question is, what can we do to reach our community? Because the way we look at it, we talk about there are 3 big boxes. And again, we've added a 4th: outreach, spiritual growth, leadership development. Almost everything you do at your church falls into one of those 3 boxes. Now, there is a 4th box, which is unleashing compassion. So what you're doing to serve your community. But that is the way and there's sort of a pathway. People are not involved with Christ, and they're not involved in your church, and you do outreach to get them into your church. They come into your church, and then you begin to scheme ways to get them to grow spiritually. So you have spiritual growth. Well, as they grow spiritually, one of the dimensions of that is serving, and you get them to go into serving. And as they begin to serve, you want them to unleash compassion, and that's both through tithing and giving generously to make ministries happen. Mm-hmm. So the 4 questions: what can we do to reach our community for Christ this year? And you just brainstorm, and people say, well, if we hired a youth pastor, maybe we could reach the youth. Or if we did a summer carnival, we could get a lot of families onto our campus, and we can invite them to come to our church. And you will get all kinds of ideas. You can seed ideas as a leader. You can give some of your own ideas, and people will jump onto those. First one. The second one is...
So let me pause there. So what we're really talking about here is a foundation to the meeting. People are coming, they're sitting at round tables, and you want to have this big takeaway. I want to ask and answer 4 questions. Mm-hmm. And if we ask and answer those 4 questions, we will have an idea of where we're going to go.
Yeah.
And John just asked that first question. So how you want to do that, ask the question from that first question. Around the tables, remember they have their sticky notes.
Yes.
You want them brainstorm at your table, what are the things that we are doing well as a church. Write them on a piece of paper. And then what we typically do is we'll have the people at that round table, we'll say, come up with your top 3 or 4, and let's share those.
Yes.
And then they'll either bring the sticky note up to the front, put it on the whiteboard, and or somebody will just handwrite up there everything that they're hearing. But pretty soon you start to build this list of here are the great things that our church is doing. And that's a momentum builder. But at the same time, whether you realize it or not, you're unifying your church.
Yeah.
You're bringing them all together. Whether, like John said, they're all looking, going, wow, look at the way God is moving in our church.
And you're also doing a diagnostic, because what you do is when they bring those things up there and they're saying, hey, these things are going well, you clump them into those 4 categories. Which ones are outreach? Which ones are leadership or spiritual growth, which ones are leadership development, and which ones are unleashing compassion. And then you begin to see what areas you need to concentrate more on.
Yeah, and I think we even have a picture here of an actual meeting. So this took place at a church, and here you can see people are at round tables, and they've got their yellow sticky notes there. They're discussing the great things that are going on at their church. It literally is this simple. Just put round tables in a room, put 6 or 8 people at a table, have them write down their stuff.
Now, when you clump these into the 4 categories, you're going to see there's an overwhelming number of things on one category. Outreach, spiritual growth, leadership development, or unleashing compassion. Which category is it?
Yeah, it's spiritual growth.
Spiritual growth. Most churches, that's all they do is spiritual growth, which is good because that's what we're supposed to be doing. But then churches will ask 2 questions. Why are we not growing? Why can't we get anyone to visit? And number 2, how come we can't get anyone to do anything around here? It feels like a few small people do all the work. Well, it's because you're not doing anything in the areas of outreach and leadership development. And so a lot of the brainstorming really comes down to those 2 categories, because spiritual growth typically does very well in most churches.
Yeah.
And so you ask that question, you ask those questions, how do we grow our congregation spiritually? And a lot of times we'll ask for input into the messages we're speaking. Hey, what do you want to hear us preach about? Is there a series? Is there a book of the Bible? And they give you input. Now, you don't have to use all the input, but it does help shape some of your thinking as you begin to plan.
Yeah, and another thing that we've done there is we've come, as John said, you can precede some of these. We've come with maybe 6 or 8 different topics for sermons, outlines for the next year. And you could go, hey, we're thinking about preaching on these topics.
Yes.
How to raise kids, how to strengthen your marriage. And you can come with 6 or 8 that are pre-filled, and you can have them weigh in.
Yes.
What do you guys think about this? Because remember, all you have to do is get them to weigh in, and they're going to feel like they've helped create it. Because you've given them a voice.
Right. So you force rank them. You have them force rank maybe the topics you've already pre-chosen. And then when you come to preach it, they'll say, hey, you got to come to my church. I told our pastor he should speak on this. And that actually does happen. The third one is, what can we do to develop more volunteers? And probably, the most important one we do is to do a spiritual gift class or teach on it and get people to realize they have spiritual gifts that need to be employed in the church. And then there's a fourth question: what can we do to serve our community next year? Now, this is going to be a whole module in itself, but we really believe in Acts chapter 2, it talks about that they gathered together, enjoying their favor. They shared meals together in their home, and there was this. It was good deeds. They began to share to the community. They gave to anyone as they had need. Well, the good deeds led to goodwill. It said they enjoyed favor among all the people. And that goodwill ended up leading to the spreading of the good news. It said the Lord added to their number daily those that were being saved. And so we're going to talk about, when you serve your community, you're creating goodwill, which leads to the good news. A lot of churches try to share the good news without goodwill, and people do not come to Christ that way.
Yeah, so when you're thinking about your community, you need to get specific and say, if we're going to serve our community, who exactly in the community should we be serving? So one of the questions that you can ask on this part that we're on is, what groups of people should we be going after?
Yes.
And the moment you just ask that, what group of people, it's so fun to watch again, they're going to write down on their little Post-it notes who they're thinking about, but you're going to hear things like, we should go after married couples because divorce is such a high rate. We should go after the youth in our community because they're struggling. We've recently heard we should go after certain ethnicities. We have a large Hispanic community. We should go after the Hispanic community, or we should go after the African American community. But the point is, can we go after a community, go after them saying, we have something that we can share with them, the good news of Christ, but have them come up with who should we go after and how should we do that?
Yeah. No, and then you begin to build what will be your ministry over the next year. And a couple of things happen. People get excited about it. And so number one, they'll volunteer to make it happen. And a lot of times we'll call people out. They'll have an idea and they'll be pushing. A lot of people begin to rally and try to push people on their ideas.
They advocate for
And if someone has that kind of passion, you tap them and say, hey, Bob, will you lead this? And you can often get a volunteer team in this meeting to help lead it. Second, they'll help fund it. And a lot of times we'll say, hey, we want you to take a blank card and write on it what you're willing to give above and beyond your regular giving to help fund this new ministry. We collect those, and it's amazing. Sometimes we've been able to see churches hire a youth pastor, and they've got their first 6 months of salary covered from this meeting.
Yeah.
So these questions are really important. We have some more in the book that you can take a look at.
Yeah, and once you get all of these, what we actually do is have them come up to the front when they put their sticky note on there and tell the group, hey, we think we should go after this group. Here's how we want to grow. So you get ideas both in outreach, spiritual growth, leadership development of what are the most interesting things that people come up with at their tables. But then we have them vote.
Yes.
And this is one of the keys to the afternoon. So this is the little round dots that I was telling you that you needed for materials. Tell us about voting.
We'll say, and it just depends on how many people you have. You'll get 3 votes or 5 votes.
Which means 3 dots.
3 dots.
5 little dots.
So they'll come up and they'll put their dots next to the ideas on the board, and that's how they'll begin to decide what are the most popular things that God seems to be saying to the congregation and to you, and it'll help you to begin to develop what things should we go over in the next year.
Yeah, now you can rank these. So now that at the end of this, where everybody's placed their dots, it's really fun to watch because you'll start to see clumpings of votes around certain things that really resonate in the room. And honestly, John, we've done this so many times where it just feels like the Holy Spirit's at work and leading this church to say, we want you to go after this group of people in this area. We want you to support them, nurture them. And then, as John said, you're going to come up with how do we do that? And that's where you can ask them to be praying about that group. You can ask them to become involved in that from a volunteer point of view. You can ask them to support it financially. But what you've really been left with at the end of the day is we now have a direction for our church.
Yes.
Where we know crystal clearly, if God has spoken to us through this entire group, where we're headed for this next year. And you've gotten this entire group of people to help put it together. That means they're creating it.
Now, oftentimes, we'll do this over a 2-day period. So it won't just be one day. We'll do it maybe on Sunday and Monday. And we've done it even as long as 3 days. Because sometimes you need time to prep the congregation. So sometimes we'll do the brainstorming. And the staff will get away the next day and sort of rearrange some of the stuff, rewrite it, put it into some new phrases, and help direct the congregation. And then it'll do the voting on the second day. Mm-hmm. And it'll give them a chance to sort of shape, maybe remove some things that, are certainly
outliers. Didn't make any
outliers.
Sense.
So you can shape this as a staff. Don't think you're bound to do exactly what they say, but use it as a guiding point to shape it.
Yep. Now, one of the interesting things is that because everybody in the room has voted, they're really feeling like they're on the ground floor and on the shaping of your church and where this is going. They really will support it over this next year. And so when people are getting ready to leave, we'd ask that you ask them to do this. Number one is to be praying daily about these things that you've just come up with that are super important. Number two, ask them if they would serve and volunteer to support the area that was of most interest to them.
Yes.
And so collect names of people that are, as they're voting, and you know what they're voting on. Ask them if they would give you a card at the end saying, I'm willing to help you in this particular area. And then the final one, as John said, is ask them to be in prayer, but will they support? And we've actually said, if you can do it today, write an amount that you're willing to support us with, or over the course of the next week or the next month, would you agree to make a commitment of what you will do above and beyond your normal tithe to help us support what we've just felt God has led us to do in our church.
And then the next step after this is go public. And so we'll actually set aside a weekend and we'll share the results with the entire congregation. We'll involve some of the people to come up and tell about the experience. We'll list them out, we'll hand them in a bulletin, and we'll ask them to commit and get involved in this process as well.
Yep. And then the other thing we think is vitally important, remember John said at the beginning of this, establish the core group and meet regularly. It is so important that after you do this one time, that now you actually do start meeting with your core group regularly. Get that group back together because they're going to want to know, how is this going? Are we doing the things that we said that we were going to do? What are we doing to further each one of those things that we've come up with that we said they were going to do? So it gives you a great reason for your core group to meet again, because now we can report the progress, but we can also re-enlist their support and invite new people.
Yeah, and part of this whole process is making sure you have a balanced approach to ministry. Do you have enough things you're doing in outreach that your church is going to grow? Do you have enough things in the spiritual growth category where your people are being discipled and growing closer to Christ? Number 3, are you doing things to develop leaders? Are you training the next generation of folks that will lead this church? And ultimately, are you serving the community? And you want to look at that and go, are we balanced? Most churches are unbalanced. And I would leave you with this challenge. We've traveled around the country. I've done this with dozens and dozens of churches. We've actually gone and helped facilitate Oftentimes, it's good to have a facilitator with you, somebody from outside your congregation. They can kind of play good cop, bad cop in this process, but they also bring in a level of expertise. And so there are people connected to your church you can bring in. There's denominational leaders, or we here at Church Goals do this type of thing. We can provide someone to help be a facilitator for you.
Yeah, and thinking back to John's opening comment, before you have put together a core group, if you asked your church, who's the pastor of your church? Who's the minister here? They're all going to point to you, the senior pastor. You're not going to be able to grow as quickly or even as effectively as unless you did this.
And it's not the New Testament model. The New Testament, in the Old Testament, you had priests. Everyone had to go before the priest. In the New Testament, everyone's a minister. Everyone has been given spiritual gifts, and they're to be used for the edification of the body. In fact, Paul says, if one spiritual gift isn't employed in the congregation, the entire congregation feels it. So everyone needs to jump in.
Yeah, and when people come up with the 3 or 4 or 5 things that are the most important, that they've all agreed, we voted on them, this is what we're going to accomplish this year, and you've recruited them to help you, you've just made ministers of them. And watch how fast your church will grow when you get all of the movers and shakers in your church understanding what we're trying to accomplish, agreeing to help you with it, both in prayer, in their action by serving, and financially. We've seen this work for the last 25 years.
Yes. So again, go after this, get that core group, develop them, have them meet monthly, and then have your yearly reboot. It'll make a huge difference in the life of your church.